Freitas is the author of The Man Book, a point-by-point guide to sucking it up and getting the job done.
They want a noble mission. They want to do difficult things. They want to do hard things, but they've been told that they need to be emasculated because they're what's wrong with society. That is incredibly confusing to young men.
A former Green Beret and Virginia state legislator, Freitas joins me to share a much-needed message for today's young men.
What we need is to understand that God has created men for a particular purpose. We're supposed to be strong. We're supposed to be capable. Why? So we can honor God, protect our families, and protect our civilization.
This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Yanya Keller. Mick Freitas, such a pleasure to have you on American Thought Leaders.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
So you just said something very interesting. This conference we're at here today, ARC, it's all about saving or restoring Western civilization. But you're saying that when young men hear about this, they're not thinking about it the same way that many of the people here are. Tell me more.
So essentially, when most of us say Western civilization, especially in an area like this, we all kind of look at this as a combination of classically liberal values with respect to free markets, private property rights, representative government. We think about things like John Locke or Montesquieu, Blackstone, the founding fathers of the United States. These are the things that are automatically conjured up when we talk about Western civilization. And therefore, it's obvious to all of us and why it should be saved. But if you're a young man that has gone through about the last 20 years where you've watched as most of pop culture has told you that you are responsible for all of the world's ills, that the future is female, that you really don't have a place, that your masculinity is toxic, and therefore the solution is to make you more feminine. Well, if you're a young man hearing about, well, we got to save civilization, a young man's obvious and quite frankly logical response to that is, do you mean the civilization that saves me, or the civilization that is too weak to protect me from the popular culture? Because either way, that's not an enticement. And so if you want to know why a lot of young men are starting to entertain ideas, philosophies, and ideologies that I think a lot of us were thought left dead and buried in the 20th century, that's why. The other reason why they're starting to entertain what we might consider some of the worst philosophies is because for 20 years they've been told by what we might call critical theorists, or in America we refer to as woke, or feminists, that they're Nazis, right? That they're fascists. So imagine you're a young man and you don't really have as much of a frame of reference for these things other than you know that they're bad. And now you're being called these things by people who clearly hate you. You've never identified with those things. You don't even know what those things really are on any sort of like base philosophical level. But you know what you do know? You know all of your enemies hate that thing. Well, if all of your enemies hate that thing and they hate you, maybe it's time to reconsider that thing. And so the very people that claim to want to stop fascism and Nazism and bigotry and everything else are the ones actually allowing for those things to be reconsidered within popular conversation among young men because they've been inappropriately identified as those things. And so I think it's critical now more than ever that if we're going to talk about saving Western civilization, that we better do a much better job of identifying it, and we better have the men within that civilization doing a much better job stepping up and defending the young men that have been repeatedly attacked by certain sectors of the popular culture.
But, per your book, Man Book, the young men need to suck it up as well, right? As you're talking about this, part of me is thinking of it as a kind of a victimology in itself.
Well, so actually that's a good point. So I'm not calling for anybody to be a victim, but we've created within pop culture and within the left, victim status and intersectional politics is how you gain social currency. So the more victim things I can claim, the more powerful I am. And we shouldn't be surprised, because if you look at Karl Marx, right, it's from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. Well, that sort of philosophy prioritizes need over ability. Ability is put upon, it's punished. Need is rewarded with more stuff, right? So we shouldn't be surprised when Marxist ideologies yield to the sort of society that says, I want to accumulate as many victim points as I can get. I'm not telling young men to adopt a victim mentality. What I'm doing is I'm acknowledging that they're actually facing an onslaught that arguably men throughout time have never faced before. I grew up in the 90s. All right, I went off and I fought for my country. I was in Army Special Forces. Masculinity.
Tell me a little more about that. Actually,
so I graduated high school in 1998. I got married in 1999. I joined the military in '98. I served in Army Special Forces, better known as Green Berets. So I did a couple combat tours over in Iraq, doing a lot of kicking indoors and finding bad guys. And I grew up as probably the last generation where being a strong masculine man was rewarded. Women expected it of you. They appreciated it of you. They rewarded you for it, right? And so did society at large, right? We respected men who put on a badge, put on a uniform, did dangerous things. We respected successful business leaders. Well, that started to change fairly quickly. It had already been changing within our university system, but it hadn't actually filtered down into popular culture until, I would argue, after I was graduated high school, married, and had a profession. And so I think it's important for men of my generation to understand that we face challenges, right? Yeah, at 25, I was at war. A lot of 25-year-olds now, we're not at war at 25, right? My grandfather was fighting the Empire of Japan during World War II at 16, right? And didn't expect to be thanked for it. It was just something that you did. Those are incredible challenges, right? They're challenges that could potentially cost you your life, but they were also challenges that you were rewarded, appreciated, and respected for. Now I want you to imagine an environment where, yeah, economically, in many respects, technologically wise, there's more creature comforts than we could ever imagine. And so it's easier for men of my generation to look at younger men and be like, what are you complaining about? You have access to all of this freedom, safety, opportunity. What are you complaining about? And the thing is that what they're complaining about is they want a noble mission. They want to do difficult things. They want to do hard things, but they've been told that they need to be emasculated because they're what's wrong with society. That is incredibly confusing to young men. So I'm not telling them to be victims. Like, as you said, the subtitle of my book is How to Suck It Up and Get the Job Done, because that's what defines a man. What defines a man, other than the biological traits, right? What defines a man is your ability to put aside a desire for comfort or a desire to avoid danger in order to fulfill your word, to protect the people that you love, and to protect the things that you love. And so, yes, even this generation of men will have to suck it up and be a man and get the job done. But we're not going to convince them of that if we don't first acknowledge that for the last 20 years, they've largely been told to sit down, shut up, and that they have no place. So acknowledge the problem. I'm not going to reward them. Now, if they choose to be victims as a result of this, if they choose to say, well, I don't care, I'm going to give up on civilization, I'm just going to play video games and watch porn, well, then I'm going to tell them they've adopted a victim mentality and they're weak, because that's accurate. What I'm telling them to do is that, no, we need them. We need them to actually stand up, and if they don't like what's going on in society, they need to be a part of the solution for that.
Well, and what I hear you saying is that we need to communicate aggressively to them that we need them for that.
We need to we need to do a couple of things. We need to communicate it aggressively. We need to stick up for them when the culture is trying to push them down, right? Men my age need to say, back off. That, he's doing the right thing by trying to be a man. And the other thing we do is we need to model it. I have watched for too long within the Western church, within Western society, within Western politics. We've all had this idea, even as men, is like, oh yes, we're so crappy and the women are so wonderful. And you see the same thing. The Mother's Day sermon is all about how women are great, and the Father's Day sermon are all about how you need to work harder. All right, well, no, what we need is to understand that God has created men for a particular purpose. We're supposed to be strong. We're supposed to be capable. Why? So we can honor God, protect our families, and protect our civilization. If you want to, men want that. There's an interesting phenomenon that I like to talk about, and it almost seems silly to bring up in a place like this, but it's really important to understand on a cultural level. There was this series of videos that were going around on the internet for a while, and it was this symphony orchestra version. The music was a symphony orchestra version of Madonna's Like a Prayer, which seems like a ridiculous song for that predominantly is played by him, either by them. It was either the crusader that was fighting against the barbarian horde and knew he was going to die, or it's the space marines that are all gathered around a single flag and a rock, and they're being overwhelmed by enemy forces, and they're just sitting there defiantly standing to the end. And when you see this music and you see this imagery, and you see that it has 10 million views, and that the various offshoots of this video have millions upon millions of views themselves. Why? Because every young boy wants to believe that in that sort of situation, he would be that kind of man. If we actually want to appeal to today's youth, We do have to acknowledge the struggles that they face and the uniqueness of those struggles, but then we also have to show them to be the sort of man that other people can depend on. And we need to tell them to stop asking permission from popular culture in order to do it. Just do it. Be the men that God has created you to be. And here, we're going to show you how to do it, and we're going to provide you the rites of passage. We're going to provide you the discipleship. We're going to provide you the mentorship that you need to actually become that person.
Nick, one quick sec. We're going to take a break, and folks, we're going to be right back.
Finding the perfect